where the stay shape, thought finds out, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest, one of his advocacy, growing top performing sales people one step at a time, no other than Mr. Tim Barry.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate you having me on your show here today.
Welcome, Mr. Tim on Abstract Essay. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Sure. I'm Tim Berry. I own Sandler Training of Fort Worth, and I've been a Sandler trainer for the past 10 years. Been an entrepreneur since I was 14 years old. So this year is my 42nd year of being self employed. So, yeah, just helping people figure out how to scale their businesses on the revenue side and increase profitability and build successful sales pipelines. That's the focus of my business at the moment.
Mr. Tim, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And thank you for empowering us. So, today let's talk about why salespeople fail. So, tell us, beyond lack of technical skill, what are the most common mindset or psychological hurdles like fear of rejection or imposter syndrome that truly cause a salesperson to fail?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question and an awesome topic. All those things that you mentioned for sure are components that come into play, right? Fear or hesitation. But what we've really boiled sales down to is that sales is nothing more than having adult conversations to determine if there's a fit, whether to do business together or not. And I think there's a lot of misnomers about what salespeople do, what their role is. Most of the time when I ask a group of people, what's the first word that comes to mind when I say the word salesperson? It's almost always a negative word. It's almost always negative connotations, and and that's because historically salespeople have been manipulative and self-serving. And so what we teach, what I teach specifically is the art form of magnificent conversations that actually mean something. There's an alignment or there's not alignment. There's a fit or not a fit when you're talking to prospects. And just being honest about that is kind of the foundation that we start at. Does that make sense, Daniel?
Makes sense, Mr. Tim. Many salespeople struggle with the feast or famine cycle. Is it this a failure of process, discipline, or something deeper?
That's a fun question. I think it's a little of both, right? If you're feast or famine in your sales cycle, what that, the first place I'll start to look at is what are your prospecting behaviors like? How are you executing your prospecting plan? How much time each day are you dedicated to hunting for that new business? Here's what we know: if you spend 60% of your day, 60% of your day hunting for new business, you're going to have a sustainable growth pattern over time. Now, because most salespeople don't love hunting for new business, they like doing the things that they're more comfortable with. I mean, let's be honest, nobody loves cold calling, but when you don't have a sales pipeline, of course, you've got to do cold calls. And so what I tend to see in the marketplace with salespeople is that they'll avoid that. They'll answer emails or they'll quote unquote do research on their customer that they're about to call, or they'll do everything except for the behavior of prospecting, picking up that phone or going to the networking event or posting on LinkedIn. They avoid those hunting behaviors. And that's why there's a feast or famine. And then once they do finally land an account and they get a client, then the new excuse becomes, well, I have to service this account. I have to be busy with this new account. Did all this work to close this piece of business, and now I've got to do something with it. And so they get lazy on the prospecting side, and that's the boom bust, the feast or famine part of what the problem is. The real commitment and the solution for that, Danielle, is that you've got to make sure that you've got 60% of that white space on your calendar every day has to be dedicated towards hunting for new business. And that means you've got to spend 4.5 or 5 hours per day actually hunting. And that's what the formula for success is.
Interesting and empowering answer, Mr. Tim. You often hear that sales is a number game. Is this a motivating truth or a dangerous oversimplification that actually sets people up from for failure?
Sales to a point is a numbers game, right? You want to make sure that you've got a good plan going forward. I think what traditional salespeople tend to do, and to our whole topic, which is why people fail, I think there's a trap that salespeople fall into, and it's that they're going to have conversations with anybody that has a pulse, and they're going to create superficial trust in the beginning. And the next step that they do is they go right into presentation mode, when in fact they really don't have any basis for going into presentation mode. And the third step that they'll do is then they'll try to close the sale. They'll try to answer and overcome objections. And the problem with that is that the prospect also has a defense mechanism and a system that they put salespeople through. And the prospect system sounds kind of like this. The first thing the prospect does is they will feign interest. They'll say, "Oh, wow, that's interesting. Why don't you tell me more about that?" But here's the catch. The second step in that prospect system is that they're going to take all of your information, and an unwitting salesperson is going to be happy to dump tons of product information and service information and give all of that free consulting out when in fact there's no basis for it. The third trap that the prospect sets for the salesperson is that they're going to avoid committing. And so they're going to work really hard to deflect and to not sign on the dotted line at the exact same time when the salesperson is trying hardest to overcome the objections and get them to sign on the dotted line. And then, of course, the dance at the very end is that while the prospect is working hard to close, to avoid committing, they'll say, "Hey, why don't you call me next week at the end of next week?" And then they ghost the salesperson. And so that is the buyer seller dance that happens. It's the game that happens between the prospect and the salesperson.
Mr. Tim, how does a salesperson's own self talk and internal narrative directly impact their close rate and long term resilience?
It's important to have a positive mindset, and you've got to, you can't just have a positive mindset and kind of hope to God that things are going to work out for you. But if you have a negative self image, then the prospect is going to pick up on that. If the salesperson doesn't believe in themselves and what they're selling, the prospect's going to pick up on that, and it's going to translate in mistrust. And so I think that that it's important for the salesperson, when you're in sales, you've got to believe in both yourself and what you do. And it's not to say that you just can do, oh, positive mental attitude is going to fix everything. It's not, because it's only a component to a successful sales career. But having the right attitude is going to be important. And like I said, a couple times, believing in what you're selling is down to your core is going to help with building trust and gaining that trusted advisor status with the prospect.
Mr. Tim, on strategy and process, where is the most common breaking point in the sales process? Is it the initial outreach, qualifying, handling objections, or actually asking for the business?
I think the biggest problem is that the traditional salesperson has they fall into the trap of the prospect's buying system. And this is why I like Sandler so much, and it's proven out over time. This isn't a sales pitch for Sandler. What I'm saying is that the idea of Sandler is that you build trust first and you do it deeply. You don't just do superficial trust building, but then the next step is that you build equal business stature. What we know about the prospect is the prospect usually thinks in their head that they're the one that's in control of the sale. And there's a beautiful strategy that Sandler has that helps the salesperson gain equal business stature. So you're looking eye to eye with your prospect, and there's that there's a mutually agreed upon agenda for what's about to happen. The third step for Sandler is that then you have a deep, meaningful conversation about the pain that the prospect is experiencing because of the things that they bring to you. And when I'm talking about pain, I'm not just talking about like an irritation or something that they learned to live with. I'm talking about the kind of pain that makes the prospect take action and will make a change. And so from there, you of course, in Sandler, you dealing with the investment that's required to solve that pain. The salesperson has to explore with the prospect on the decision making process, and only when you have those five things: trust, equal business stature, pain, investment, and the decision. Once you understand fully what those steps are, then and only then do you present any solutions, but it's only to the things that you discovered in that conversation with the prospect. And then, of course, the beautiful part about Sandler is we know that there's a post sell step too. So when the client says, "Yep, we're about to let's sign on the dotted line, let's move forward, and you've got your sale," then this Sandler trained salesperson, I teach them to protect that sale and to get their referrals and stuff right out of right at that point. So
Mr. Tim, tell us, in your experience, what is the single biggest mistake salesperson make when they first engage with Protect that ultimately derails the entire conversation?
it's funny that you ask this because the same thing that derails salespeople is what many people do in their marriages. A lot of times you hear when your
True.
when your wife comes home and they're from work and she's frustrated with something that happened at work. Many husbands tend to launch right into fix mode, and that annoys our wives because they don't want you to fix anything. They just want to say it out loud. Well, to answer your question directly, I think salespeople struggle with the same thing. The first thing that a prospect tends to bring to a salesperson, soon as they hear something that they think they can fix, the salesperson launches into solution based selling. And I think that's a mistake because what usually happens is whatever the problem that the prospect brings to the salesperson first is not actually the problem, it's just a symptom. And so it's the salesperson's job to question, what is underneath that. And so that's where I think the number one problem is that salespeople prematurely start selling.
Interesting, Mr. Tim. Is failure more often due to a lack of activity or lack of effectiveness?
Uh, I've got an interesting definition of failure, and I teach this to salespeople. The My alternative definition of failing is this: while most people think failure is a negative, terrible thing, what I assert is that all learning only happens through failure. And furthermore, that if you don't fail, it's because you're not actually trying anything. So I encourage salespeople to get really comfortable with the concept of failure because there's a couple ideas that I share. One is that failure is neither good nor bad, it is merely the emotion that you assign to it. The second part is if all learning only happens through failure, what do you do with it, right? You have to separate a failure in sales, for example, from your identity of who you are. So there's this concept of identity versus role. And your identity you can't own the failure. You cannot attach a failure in a given conversation or in a given sale with who you are because you're not the failure. You just failed at that thing, right? And so with failure, I always share that you should debrief whatever you failed at, and then you need to look at what could you have done differently or better, and then be resilient and learn from those mistakes, right? So you don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again and end up with a bad result. That is the definition of insanity. But if you weaponize your failure and extract out lessons learned, and you try new ways of accomplishing, the of achieving the goal of closing that business, then you can, you're resilient and you learn from that, and that's how you gain experience. So you can't avoid failure because, in sales especially, you can only control two things in sales: your emotions and how you react to things. That's it. You can't make the prospect buy from you. You can't, you know, squeeze them until they say yes. You can only control you, yourself, and then your reactions. And so being resilient is part of sales. You have to have that because otherwise you're going to be in counseling all the time.
Definitely. And Mr. Tim, how critical is a defined sales process to preventing failure, and why do so many reps resist following one?
Uh, I think that most sales training revolves around features and benefits, right? I mean, think about in a time when you worked for someone else in a sales role, the very first thing they did was they're like, let us teach you all about our products or our service. Here's the features and why we're better than our competitors. And that's the same old thing. This is what I was talking about. The whole concept of why salespeople fail is because the prospect has become trained like a ninja on avoiding the same old garbage that they've heard 50 times before from other salespeople, right? And so the salesperson's job, I teach salespeople, look, you don't know whether you're going to be able to be a match for them or not. And by the way, not being a fit to work together is okay too. What I'm looking for is I'm looking to filter through the right prospects and figure out, the ones that are a fit and the ones that aren't. A no is as good as a yes in many respects, because if a prospect tells the salesperson no, at least you don't have to chase them anymore. What we really don't want to hear as salespeople is we really don't want to hear, well, maybe, right? Because then there's the salespeople gets hopeful ears. So I don't know if that exactly answers what you were asking, but being definitive in qualifying the qualified prospect is important, but also disqualifying the unqualified prospect is equally as important. Talk to the willing. Don't keep wasting your time chasing the duds.
Measure team on external factors, environment. How much of a salesperson's failure is actually a failure of their leadership, training, or the company culture they're in?
I mean, it could be a lot. It depends on the scenario, right? So, uh, if you've got terrible leadership, chances are you, the salesperson, don't believe in what you're doing, right? And so that does come into play because it's going to bleed out. That's going to show and present when you're in front of a prospect. If you don't believe in your leadership, if your leadership or your company is dealing with a bad product and the salesperson knows it, you're not going to sell with the same belief and vigor and attitude that you would sell if you really were fully bought in. And so I think leadership is important for sure in sales. And a good sales leader, a sales manager, or a VP of sales, uh, those people develop their sales teams. They teach them not to sell features and benefits, and they invest in them in that personal and professional development. And so that's why, again, in stuff like sales Sandler training, that's why I exist. Is I'm looking for the business owners who are making investments in the development of their people beyond just, oh, here, let's talk about features and benefits of our product.
Mr. Tim, so with the rise of social selling and digital outreach, what are the new modern failure points that did not exist for salespeople a decade ago?
That's a fun one. I'm 56 years old at this point, and I've been around since before Google, which makes me 1,000 years
Yes.
old.
Okay.
uh, but in reality, I teach salespeople that you've got to build your specific brand, your individual brand. And what I mean by that is, yes, you're representing the company that you're selling for, but you want to be known for what you do as well on social media. So using LinkedIn, for example, is incredibly important. Being present on Instagram, even TikTok, to talk about the things in your business that matter. Being present is really important on social media because people, while they may not necessarily interact with you, it might not translate into hundreds of thousands of followers, right? The
Yes.
reality is that if you're not on there, we live in this weird world where you can peek into other people's worlds by watching them on video, on reels, on TikTok, and on Instagram. I'll give you an example. I've got like 7,500 followers on Instagram, which is weird because I'm an old white guy, and
Hmm.
who wants to watch an old white guy? But I post regularly on Instagram about sales. And so I've got 70, I don't know, 72 or 74, 7,500 followers. And so I think that, and that will translate into, sales revenue for me. And it has. And so I think that it's social selling is an important component, but it is only one component. I think too many salespeople, especially the young salespeople, the newer ones, will only rely on social media for selling. And that's not true too. You've got generational differences in how you sell to different generations. Like I'm Gen X, right? So
Hmm.
I'm part of the original feral generation of latchkey kids, and there are, we are sophisticated, yet we still oftentimes read actual physical books. We don't necessarily read ebooks or whatever. um, but we will also respond, and we do have a pretty good social media presence versus the Gen Z. They're pretty exclusively communicating digitally, and so you've got to be able to straddle the different generations. Millennials are different from Z's, X's are different from millennials, boomers are different from X's, and we've got to be able to straddle all of those different generations.
Indeed, cater all those generations from baby boomers to Gen Z. It's something else. So let's talk about on specific skills and behaviors. The ability to truly listen is cited as a key skill. What does a bad listening look like in a sales context, and how does it directly lead to lost deals?
We've all been in conversations with people who cannot wait to answer, right? It's almost like they're just chomping at the bit to break into the next time they can talk. And what we know in sales is this, is that our prospects want to be both heard and understood. And in order to do that, the salesperson has to not be pre-planning in their head what the next thing they say is. And it's not that you're not prepared for the sales conversation, but it means that you want to be present with your prospect and hear what they're saying deeply. Like so we there's a couple techniques for active listening that we teach, and that's, when you hear something, when your prospect makes a statement or has a question, like restate it or at least paraphrase it to make sure that you got it right. And then, answer the question with a question, like dig down. Like, that sounds like that's important to you. When someone says, what's your price? And they do that early in the prospecting call, instead of going, well, our price is, uh, $50,000, which is going to likely automatically disqualify that salesperson immediately. The prospect's going to go, get out of here with that. But say, it sounds like price is an important part of this conversation. Can you tell me more about that? Right. And then you dig in, right? You don't just give them the price, you start to develop a conversation. And then again, when you have a Sandler sales process in place, you know that it's a trap. Somebody prematurely asks you about price, you can't fall into that unless it's, you know, you're far enough into the conversation to understand where that question's coming from.
Interesting, Mr. Team, and thank you for that empowering answer. What is the relationship between a salesperson's failure to build a genuine trust and their failure to win business?
I think when a salesperson is unenthusiastic and not committed to the product or the service that they're selling, they're going to get pushed around a lot. And so I don't know the perfect way to answer the question, but when you have conviction in the process that you're following, nothing can get you off track. And this is again why I like the 7-step Sandler sales process, because lots of things come up in a conversation. And if you're committed to the execution of the Sandler process, you don't get lost in where you don't forget things, because there's a specific formula for how to do. Now there's an artful way to execute that thing, and that's the reason why the sales training stuff that I do uh, happens over time. It's not an event. You can't just go to a boot camp and be, oh, now I know everything about how to sell. It takes time to embed that into a new trainee's mind. But
Mr. Tim, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in a fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 second season, and my baby podcast, mental health 101, and Low 101, and my movie 101 review, and music 101 in its fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in its second season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Team, tell us, looking at all factors, what would you say is the fundamental difference between salesperson who consistently doing their best?
It's all about behaviors, executing the winning behaviors to growing your business, right? The difference between top performing salespeople and the bottom ones is always the consistent discipline that they're in executing the winning behaviors. That's really where it's at. They're the I can go into virtually any company on the planet, and I can, just by looking at the prospecting behaviors, which salespeople are the top performers and which ones are the variable performers. And I think that that's the key. You need to be actively hunting. Like I said in the beginning of this podcast, you've got to be actively hunting 60% of the time in your day. You've got to be actively hunting, and it has to be every day, not just when it feels good or when you feel like you're on a roll. You've got to just execute, day in and day out in order to grow that business and scale. And without that, you're going to be subject to that boom bust that so many sales people struggle with.
It must be every day. Mr. Tim Barry, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your business, your advocacy, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Sure. Right now, I'm running. This is I've run my 28th episode of Sales Lab Live. If you're interested in joining a free 30-minute sales training every week, I run it at 11 a.m. Central time, and it's 30 minutes of hardcore sales training. I've got all the episodes on my YouTube channel. Connect with me on LinkedIn and also Instagram, and follow me on YouTube. So.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Tim Barry because if you support him for sure, more and more empowering sales stock will rise. So, Mr. Tim, thank you so much for your time.
Daniel, so much. I appreciate you so much. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Modicon people, see you soon.